Hello, thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to 3 Legacies Recovery Recording Podcast. I'm your host, Paul, and I'm an alcoholic. Today's date is March 8th. It's Saturday, March 8th, 2025, and this is episode 16. And I want to tell everyone thank you for all the comments, all the support we've been getting. People have been commenting and showing a lot of support on YouTube, and also to let all the listeners know we are on several of the different major platforms, streaming platforms for podcasts. We're on Audible, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and several others. And I've been meaning to get a longer list of different ones. So again, appreciate everyone. Also, our email address is recoveryrecordings615@yahoo.com. And today we have a special guest coming all the way from Flower Mound, Texas. We got Dave F. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing wonderfully well. Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate you, buddy. I've been super excited about trying to get a hold of you actually for a while now, and today is it's quite a gift. I appreciate you joining us. Your sobriety date is 12/5/81. Is that correct?
Yeah, December 5th, 1981. Yep.
Nice.
By God's grace.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. I'll give everyone just a little rundown on how I came across you. Or I heard about you when I first got sober. For all the listeners, I had, speaker tapes was always a big part of, I'd always got into, since the first month or so of my sobriety, I'd always got into different speakers. And I ran across a workshop that you and Mark Houston did back in the 2000s. It was a emotional sobriety workshop. And it really, it changed the way I looked at it a lot. Like I was telling you earlier, that I didn't really understand any of it at the time, but it inspired me. I wanted to learn more. It kind of gave me some motivation to like, what is this? What are they talking about? And then it's cool because I just got in touch with. I'd found you. I'd found contact information back last year. And reached out, and I wasn't able to contact you at the time, but then I just got your number from Glenn K, and I'm super excited about this, man. It's like a dream come true. And so I was going to think about getting you to have maybe give us a little rundown on what some of those experiences were like, how things started rolling, like with you and Mark Houston, and how all those workshops and stuff came about.
Wow, absolutely. And thank you for the opportunity to. I'm always happy to carry the message, experience, strength, and hope. I got sober in northern New Jersey as a teenager. And when I got sober, I had a fantastic sponsor. His name was Carl Rozelle. And he took me through the big book. And he had a fairly pure message that he got because our sponsorship lineage comes from Bill Wilson, and he was like 5 generations away from Bill. So I got a pretty strong big book message that hadn't been watered down a lot like that I hear today in meetings. And so I had a really good foundation. And then, of course, my life got really, really full and got good. And what does alcoholics do when their life gets full? They start knocking things out of their life. And so, and slowly but surely I started knocking out meetings and replacing with really all blessings and good stuff in my life. And I got married and had kids, and my life got very full. And as I moved further and further away from the program, I got sicker and sicker. And in that process, I stopped carrying the message that had been given to me. I wasn't carrying the gift of the big book, because it takes some time. You got to have some skin in the game to take somebody through the big book. It takes hours to carry the message through that. Whereas if I handed them a 12 and 12, I could say, hey, go read step 1, but the the 12 and 12 is designed to expand on what's in the big book, not the other way around. And trying to work the steps out of the 12 and 12, if you've ever tried it, it's incomplete at best because it's literally designed to be used with the big book. And I ended up getting to the point where I didn't drink, but I almost killed myself.
Wow.
And in that process, I hit an emotional bottom. And as I was going through making amends to the guys that I had been shortchanging, once I got back and went through the steps again and got reconnected with my roots in the big book, each one of the guys would say, "Hey, you know, that was awesome, but you went through so fast. Can you take me and my sponsee through it?" I'm like, "Sure, not a problem." And the next thing you know, I'm working with 3 guys at a time and then 5 guys at a time. And then finally it got easier just to say, "Hey, why don't we just go to this church? We'll meet in the church basement. I have access to it. We can meet there." You know, the next thing you know, there's 20 or 30 people. And then one day somebody said, "Hey, we should record these. These are awesome."
Wow.
You know, and the next thing you know, I'm on the speaking circuit. And one day somebody said, "Hey, I know this guy, Glenn. Why don't you have him come record it?" And so he did. He came and recorded one of the workshops we were doing. And you know, back then it was on cassette tapes. For you young people that don't know what that is, it's a little piece of plastic. It's stick into a machine. And then after cassette tapes, it moved on to CDs. And then after CDs, it went to MP4s. And then today it's these, you know, you don't realize how lucky we are these days to have, you know, almost instantly uploaded into the cloud, and it's right there for everybody.
Yeah.
And in that process, because I have a reading disability, I became very much dependent on speaker tapes. And because I knew Glenn Kay, he was one of the biggest tapers on the East Coast, and I became a member of his taping service. So every month I'd get a new set of recordings in the mail. And one day I got a recording of Mark Houston, and he was one of the first people that I'd ever heard that was carrying a message the way that I had been taught out of the big book. And so I reached out to Glenn and said, "Hey, I need this guy's number." And he gave me his phone number, and I called him up, and he says, "I'm down in Dallas." And I said, "Well, what are you doing tomorrow?" And he says, "Well, nothing. Why?" I said, Can you pick me up at the airport?" And he said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, I'm a pilot." So I jumped on an airplane and I flew down to Dallas, and we got together, and we ended up swapping fifth steps with each other because he hadn't been through the steps in a while, and so we went through the big book together and swapped fifth steps, and then very shortly thereafter, we got asked to do Fellowship of the Spirit in New York in 2000 or 2001. I don't remember what the year was, and it was right after we had finished our inventory process. Like a month later, we're doing this big book workshop, and man, that became extremely popular. But in the front row during that series, there was some old timers that were sitting there, and you could just tell by looking at them that they were from Manhattan and the Bronx, and 20 years in the program, and you could just tell they were kind of bored with hearing the message out of the big book. So I went to Mark and said, "Hey, let's do this again next year for the old timers. And what I'll do is I'll write some spiritual exercises, one for each of the steps, to hit the steps from a different angle and kind of shake off some of their sobriety dust. I call it spiritual plaque. We'll shake off the spiritual plaque."
Nice.
And he said, "Great." So we went up to the Wilson House, and we did the sister series to Fellowship of the Spirit, which I entitled The Next Step, Emotional Sobriety. And so that's the two recordings that you were talking about that had such a big impact on you was Fellowship of the Spirit, which was basic big book, and then The Next Step, which was a whole bunch of spiritual exercises. So the first one was a workshop, a big book workshop, and the second one was a retreat where we actually did step work together as a group, and it was quite powerful.
Nice. Yeah. And for the listeners that are, if you're wanting to check out these workshops, you can go to the videos on this on 3 Legacy YouTube channel. And we have the 2 of them. One of them is titled Mark H. and Dave F. It's a 9-part series of emotional sobriety. It's a retreat at the Wilson House in 2002. And the other one that we have on there is Mark H. and Dave F. It's a 10-part series on, it's a workshop in New York. That was July 27th of 2001. I highly encourage anyone listening to go back and check those out. Those literally, like what I was saying earlier, it shaped my, I was so interested in it, and I had no clue what it was talking about. It's added so much over the years, And
And if they do that, if they do that, I would suggest that they listen to the workshop first and then listen to emotional sobriety, because you want to get the basics of the big book down. The Saturday night speaker at that was Chris Raymer, and he was on fire.
Yeah.
So if you haven't ever heard Chris Raymer, he's just an awesome guy to listen to as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And also those they had workshop. You had worksheets on those too. So for the listeners, obviously, we don't have we don't have the workshop or the worksheets posted. But anybody interested, one of the reasons we're doing this episode is we're trying to get feedback from any of the listeners that may have questions or may have any interest in things they want us to do in the future. And me and Dave are going to try to make any of that happen if possible.
And Paul, if you want the worksheets, I have them. I can send them to you. You can post them with the recordings if that's easier.
Nice. Yeah, I'll have to see if checking, figuring out what would be an easy way of doing that. That'd be great. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the weird things. It's back in the late '80s, when the internet was a brand new thing. I got an AOL email address back when you had to dial up, and it would go, the beep bop and all that to connect. Yeah. And so when I was doing Big Book workshops, I actually put my email address in case anybody was trying to find me on the on one of my cassette tapes, and I've done it ever since. And that's why I still have the stupid AOL. I hate AOL, but I still have the AOL email address because I get 5 or 6 emails a week from people all over the world that have never been to an AA meeting or don't have access to AA, or they've been in AA and they're dying on the vine and they don't know what to do about it because the AA is dark, what I call dark tunnel AA in their local area, and they're reaching out for help. And I'm like, sure, I can help you.
Wow.
So
yeah, that's awesome. Let me ask you this. So you had mentioned New Jersey being, I guess you originally got sober in New Jersey. Is that correct?
It's affirmative. Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
And how long was you in Jersey, and what'd that look like?
Well, I was born in New Jersey. I grew up in New Jersey, and I was in New Jersey, until 2003.
Wow.
I was in New Jersey, which is a long, talk about tapes. It's kind of funny. I was living in this little house in a little town called Green Village, New Jersey. It's 20 miles due west of Newark Airport. Really expensive area. And in this tiny little house, we had outgrown it. We had a couple kids, and my wife came to me and she says, "Hey, I want to move." And I'm like, "Honey, we can't afford to move here." And she's like, "Well, we need a bigger house." And I said, "Well, Connecticut's too expensive. Taxes are too high. That leaves Pennsylvania because we can't afford anything around here in New Jersey." And I'm a pilot by trade, so I was flying out of New York out of Kennedy Airport, so I needed to be able to commute to Kennedy. And so I said, "Well, why don't you go look on the internet?" She said, "Well, I don't know anything about the internet." So I showed her how to use the internet, and she's like, "Well, why can't we move to Boston? Because my company has a base in Boston." And I was like, "No, it's too cold up there, and they don't have the kind of airplane that I fly out of Boston." And so she said, "What about Chicago?" And so she was going through all the different bases that we have pilot bases at. And I said, "Well, honey, I know what you're doing." And I said, "The only place that I would even consider is Texas, in this little town called Flower Mound, because I know I got some friends that live in Flower Mound, Texas, but I'd never been there." So she says, "Well, all right." And she goes online and she finds the only builder that builds in Pennsylvania and Flower Mound, Texas that I've ever heard of. So now I got to take her down to Flower Mound, right? And so I called Myers Raymer, one of Chris's brother, and said, "Myers, I need a realtor in the program." And he's like, "Oh, I got just the lady for you." And he says, "Call Jan." So I called Jan and I told her the truth. I said, "Jan, I want to waste a weekend. My wife's after me to move. I don't want to move, but I gotta at least show an effort. So if it's all right with you, I want to come down and waste one of your weekends. I want to go to as many houses as you could possibly take me to." And and as a matter of fact, I want her crying when we go back to the airport. She's so sick of looking at houses, and and she's like, "Okay, I'm happy to do it." And so we're driving around all weekend looking at dozens of houses, and every time I drove past this little sign for this builder, my intuition went off.
Wow.
And so finally, we're on our way back on Sunday night to the airport, and I said, "Jan, take me to that builder." She says, "Okay." So we drive to the builder, and we walk into the model house, and I hear the words that no husband ever wants to hear. My wife stops in the entryway, takes a deep breath, and goes, "Oh, I love this house." And I'm like, "Oh, no." So long story longer, we put down some money on this house. I said, "I haven't even sold my house in New Jersey. So I want to be the last house in the development that you build. And we come up with this deal and we fly back to New Jersey. And I'm flying back to New Jersey and I'm thinking, what did you just do? You just bought a house in Flower Mound, Texas. So you're out of your mind. Well, the side note to the story was one of the sets of recordings that I had done years earlier on cassette tapes got into the hands of a guy in Chicago who happened to be an airline pilot. And back before the internet, before you could, do video over the internet, I actually had an 800 number into my house so that people could call for free to my home, because back then calling on a telephone was very expensive.
Wow.
It was one of the biggest bills people had was paying for phone service.
Wow.
So I got this toll-free number to my house so I could do 12-step work with people all over the United States.
Wow.
And so I get this call from this guy and he says, could you help me? I took him through the 12 steps. And he, without unbeknownst to me, took the tapes and had given them to a guy in management at my airline. So 4 days after I buy this house in Flower Mound, Texas, the phone rings and it's a senior guy from management in my company. He says, hey, are you Dave Frederickson I'm listening to on tape? And I said, probably. He says, hey, I want you to take over our drug and alcohol program. And I said, okay, I got to take it into prayer and meditation, but I don't see a problem doing that. He said, there's one catch. And I said, what's that? He says, you're going to have to live down here in Dallas. And I started laughing. I said, you're not going to believe this, but I bought a house 4 days ago in Dallas, Texas. And I had no idea why.
Wow.
Now I know. So that was 2003. And now I live in Flower Mound, Texas.
Wow. Wow. That's all. So that also kind of brings me to the next thing. When we were talking on the phone earlier, you were talking about how, you're still in the trenches with it, right? So we were talking about, I currently go into the treatment center every week, and I'm always working, I always got a handful of guys I'm taking to the big book. And so you're still currently doing all that, even with, what did you say, 43 years of sobriety, right?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, like I said, I get 4 or 5 emails a week from all over the world. Wow. And matter of fact, this week I picked up 3 new guys. So at any particular time, I'm working with anywhere between 7 and 15 men simultaneously. Yeah. And I have my own Zoom account just for doing that. With the advent of Zoom, you can see each other. I mean, it's not the same as face to face, but it's pretty darn close. Yeah. And I've taken guys through the work from South Africa, all over Europe, all over Canada. Now I'm working with a guy in Asia, wow. in Taiwan. Wow. So, yeah. So it's that the program has absolutely changed. From Bill Wilson's day when they had to mail you a big book. Mm-hmm. Today we just, you sit in your living room, you log on through your phone or a desktop computer, and you can help somebody from anywhere in the world.
So what kind of format, what does the process look like for right now? Like, just say you start, what from start to finish, what is that? How long does that usually take on average? Well,
it depends on what the person. Usually, the people that I end up with are people that are dying on the vine. They've been sober for a while. They've either gotten away from the program and now they're back, or they're in an area where they came to AA and it was the old don't drink and go to meetings crowd, and they realize that they're dying. And then somehow they search the internet or whatever, they end up hearing a presentation that I've done. And because I give my email address, they ping me with an email. And once I get the email, I reach back out to them. And then I start by finding out, what do they know about the program? Usually it turns into, they say, well, I've been through the steps. And I'll say, okay, I hear that you've been through the steps. When you went through your 4th step, how many inventories did you do? And they're like, well, I did a resentment inventory, a fear inventory, and a sex inventory. And I said, okay, what about the rest? And they pause and they go, well, that's all my sponsor took me through. And I said, what about a sex ideal or harms done to others inventory? And they're like, what? Where is that? And I go, they're in the book. And I open up the big book, send them to the right page, and I read it to them, and they're like, oh, I never saw that in there. Like, okay, so we need to do a little 4-step work. And then I ask them about their 10 and 11. What's your prayer and meditation life like? And usually what I get back is, well, I've been praying and I got away from it, but I started praying again, and I don't really meditate. And I say, like, what about vision work? And they go, what about what? Then most people have never heard of vision work. I'm like, well, the big book gives us 3 tools, and they're always together: prayer, meditation, and vision. And they're like, I've never heard of vision. What are you talking about? I'm like, well, there's an entire chapter dedicated to it. What are you talking about? About a vision. It's called a vision for you. Where do you think that? Where do you think that title came from?
Yeah.
You know, and so then I kind of know what I'm dealing with, and then I usually give them a homework assignment. I'm like, okay, start reading from the dust cover to page 45. That'll cover all of step one. Once you're familiar with that, we'll get together on Zoom and we'll discuss it. In the meantime, I get them started on prayer number 1 of the 12 daily prayers.
Wow. Wow. Yeah,
You know?
that's huge. I'm sitting here mind blown. Like, so I have done, like, I'm assuming it's probably something similar as what you're talking about on ideals. I'm curious on what. So okay, so my current sponsor had me do an ideals list, right? In this way we shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life.
Sure.
I kind of take it further, and I just do an ideals list for everything. Like, what does my ideal look like with my relationship with my wife, sponsees, work, co-workers. I kind of take it into all that. Give me like a little rundown on what you're talking about when you're saying the ideals inventory.
Okay, so in the 4th step, when it talks about the sex inventory, right? There's 9 questions that we're supposed to answer.
Yeah.
And then as soon as we answer those 9 questions, it says, in this way, we create a sane and sound ideal for a future sex life.
Yeah.
So the ideal is literally a sex ideal. Well, if you had negative things behaviors that you had in your past relationships, if you don't come up with a vision for doing it something different, you're going to continue that exact same behavior in the next relationship you get into.
Amen.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, but if there was something good from your sex inventory, that transitions straight across your ideal. For example, if I'll talk about my first sex inventory when I went through, I was, pardon the expression, but basically I was a whore. I was sleeping around, and I was using women literally to try to make myself feel better. It was self-soothing behavior. So all I cared about was getting into a woman's knickers and then moving on to the next. And so my sex inventory indicated that I was a lot of one-night stands, but no serious long-term relationships. Well, if that's the negative, what would be the positive? So my first sex ideal said someone with whom I won't sleep with on the first date. It was literally that basic, right? But in my past relationships, the few that I had, having something in common was a good thing. So that transitioned straight across. So that was my ideal read, have something in common with them, establish the relationship based on a friendship rather than just on sex. I mean, there were just some real basic principles.
Yeah.
And what I realized is, it wasn't just about what I wanted out of a relationship. More importantly, it was about what do I want to bring to a relationship? Because the sex ideal is between me and God. It's my commitment to God as to what kind of a spiritual man am I going to bring to this next relationship? And how are the two of us going to be able to become one flesh in relationship with God? So it's about positives, not negatives.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I always go to, like, my ideals list always tends to lean towards, like, the St. Francis prayer, right? To be, to get out of self and just, to be more loving, to comfort rather than to be comforted.
Yeah, my first sex ideal was literally 3/4, or not even half a page long.
Yeah.
Today, my sex ideal is over 2 pages, 8.5 by 11 sheets.
Wow.
And I go through the 12 steps formally every January and every June to knock off the spiritual plaque. And I rewrite my ideal each time. And I've been married for almost 40 years, but I don't use my wife when I write the ideal. It's not about my wife. It's about the man that I want to bring to any relationship. It just so happens that I'm married to my wife, and that's fantastic. Yeah. But that's not the focus. I'm not writing it between me and Brad. I'm writing it between me and God.
Yeah, and it actually goes into that, right? It says, we ask God to help mold our ideals and help us live up to them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, me and a guy this morning, a buddy of mine, we did his 5th step this morning, and he's 6 months sobriety, 6 months sober, and I told him, I was like, so your ideals, we started an ideals list, and I was like, it's going to look different today than next year, and it's supposed to evolve. At 6 months of sobriety, it was way different than what it is now. Yeah, and I didn't even have an ideals list when at 6 months of sobriety. No, that part of the process was missing at the time. So that's awesome, man.
Yeah, I had a sponsee once that walked in the door, and we were going to do his sex inventory and his ideal. And we started talking about the ideal, and he opened up his big book, and he slid a picture that he'd torn out of the centerfold of a magazine. He's like, "There's my sex ideal." I said, "Dude, we got some serious work to do, because that's not what this is about."
Yeah. I get it though. I get it.
Yeah.
No, that's funny, dude. Yeah. And what about the you were talking about harms inventory? I'm not sure about this. Talk to me about this.
Well, there's all right. Can we agree that there's on the other 4 inventories?
So
right, a resentment inventory, a fear inventory, a sex inventory, and an ideal, right?
Yeah.
So if I wasn't angry at somebody, I wasn't afraid of them, and I didn't have sex with them, but I still hurt them, where do they go on in your inventory?
Nice. Yeah.
Right? And there's one line in the book that it comes from when you're dealing with it, right? And it's kind of hidden, but it's there. Hang on a second. It's all right. Let me grab my big book over here. On page 70.
Page 70. Right? Okay.
On the last paragraph, if we've been thorough about our personal inventory, written down a lot, there's a question for you. Did you write down a lot? If you've done it the way I teach it, right out of the book, you've written down a whole bunch. You got sheet after sheet, right? We've listed and analyzed our resentments. So there's the resentment inventory. We've begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We commence to see their terrible destructiveness. We've begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill towards all men, even our enemies, for we look at them as sick people. And then here's the line. We have listed the people we have hurt by our conduct.
See that.
Right? So that's a harms done to others inventory. Yeah. If they didn't fit in any one of the other inventories, yet you still know there's somebody out there that you created a harm to, I use the analogy. Let's say you come along to a gas station, right? And the attendant's in the back room using the bathroom or something, right? So you walk in the door and you click on the register and you open up the register, you steal the cash, jump in your car, and you drive off, right? You weren't angry, so you weren't resentful. You weren't afraid, and you didn't have sex with them, but you sure as hell harmed them.
Sure.
Where do they go in your inventory? Yeah. That line right there.
And let me ask you this: so, what does the format on that look like? As far as is it so many columns? Because I always just kind of chalk that stuff off to my 8-step list. You get what I mean?
Well, they will repeat on your 8-step list, yeah. Okay. But everybody that's it's the way I do the inventory. Everybody that's on your 8-step list also already appeared in one of the inventories.
Okay.
So, basically, it's just a list. You list the people that you've harmed, and column 2 would be how you harmed them. What was going on while you harmed them?
Gotcha.
And then, right, and then we deal with it when we come to the 8-step list. Is well, you've created this harm. How are we going to make amends to them? And we clean it up that way.
That's awesome.
Now, if there's still some guilt or shame or whatever after they've made the amends, sometimes we'll go back and dig into it deeper, because sometimes there was a fear that didn't appear on the fear inventory, but the reason that they did the behavior and they couldn't describe it at the time was they were acting out of fear, but it was typically a fear. It's what I call the game of whack-a-mole. It was a fear in some other area of their life, but they acted out over here, and they couldn't see the connection to the two. And sometimes when they go make amends for whatever the behavior was, typically in that amends process, let's use the gas station analogy. So the gas station attendant says, well, why did you steal the money out of my register? And during the amends, they kind of go, well, I don't know. I was just there and the opportunity presented itself and I grabbed the money and off I went. If that leaves them with still kind of an unknown question to why they were behaving that way, sometimes we'll go back and do some more spiritual work and dig into it, and we'll look around with what I call a fear hunt. We find the fear and what it was connected to. And typically it's some other thing that's completely and totally disconnected. It had nothing to do with the gas station. It was just them acting out because they were in a state of agitation when they happened to show up at the gas station.
Nice. Wow, man, that's cool. Earlier when we were talking, you had mentioned some of the stuff that you currently do is you'll go to prayer and you'll be working with a sponsee and you'll go to prayer. What was it you said that's how you come up with assignments? What was it you were talking about? Can you want to just?
Well, yeah. Typically when a guy calls me for the first time, I ask him 2 questions. First, I ask him about his inventory if he's been through the steps, and the second thing I ask him tell me about your prayer and meditation life. And, recently I was working with a guy who's got 40 years of sobriety, right? And he heard me make the statement about the 12 daily prayers. And he pulled me aside and he said, dude, what is this BS about about 12 daily prayers? And I said, well, the big book gives us 12 daily prayers. They're right in the book that we're supposed to be doing. And he's like, what are you talking about? And so I took him to page 83 and I said, well, let's go take a look at prayer number 1. Right. So we went to page 83 and I said, you got your big book with you? And he didn't have his big book with him. And I said, well, I got my big book with me. And I whipped it out. And I said, on 83, and in the first paragraph, it says, so we clean house with the family, asking. I said, what are we doing when we're asking? Praying. And he kind of hemmed and hawed, and he said, oh, that's a prayer. And I go, yeah. And I said, how often do we have to do this prayer? And he says, well, it says each morning. And I go, yeah, to me, that's right out of the big book. To me, that makes it non-negotiable. This is a daily prayer. I'm supposed to be doing this every single morning. Right? And then I said, there's 3 tools. They're always together: prayer, meditation, and vision. And notice it says asking each morning in meditation. They even tell you that you're going to have to meditate, right? That our Creator show us the way. There's the vision. How are you supposed to show somebody if they can't see it, right? So you have to see the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. And I walked them through prayer number 1, and I don't want to take the time to go through the whole thing with you, but it kind of blew his mind. And I said, there's 12 of those throughout the book. And the way I teach it is you go through prayer number 1 for a week. By the end of a week, you should have your visions for prayer number 1 down, right? And then on week number 2, we add in prayer number 2. So do prayer 1 and 2 for the next week. And then next week, it's prayer 1, 2, and 3. And by the end of 12 weeks, you got all 12 prayers down. And, if you try to do all 12 prayers on day 1, it'll take you 45 minutes and you'll burn out and you won't ever get it done. But by doing it that way, one a week, 12 weeks later, they're firing them all. On average, on a good day, it takes me about 8 minutes to do all 12 daily prayers.
Wow.
It doesn't take a long time.
This is something you've been doing for years, though.
Yeah, unless, of course, I screw up. If I was selfish, dishonest, resentful, afraid, if I've been keeping something to myself, I should have immediately shared with another. Yeah, I have to do some more spiritual work. That'll slow me down. I'll be writing a little bit of inventory. That might take me 15 or 20 minutes, but it doesn't take a whole lot of time. And, how much time is your sobriety worth? Yeah. Is it worth 30 minutes a day? Absolutely. It's cheaper than drinking.
Yeah, I hear you, man. And also the byproduct of just getting to live a life like this is unbelievable, right? So storybook life, right? And so what I would like to do, man, I would love to do how long does it take as far as going through the process? I don't know if we have time today, but to do maybe an episode or a series on this 12 daily prayers thing. What's that look like usually?
I did a talk in Monterey. It's funny. I got invited to this. I was the AA speaker at an Al-Anon convention, which was just a target-rich environment. It was wonderful.
That's funny.
And so I said, is it all right? Can I pick whatever topic I wanted to talk about? And they said, sure. And so I did an hour talk on the 12 daily prayers and the forgiveness prayer. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, it blew people's minds. But so I know I can do it in an hour or less. Yeah, it all depends how thorough you want me to go. I've also done it in a retreat setting where I spent, I bet you we spent 2.5 hours talking about it. So you can expand it as long or as short as you want, because you can give examples, you can create visions, you can do whatever you want to. It all depends on I always just let God direct it, and it takes as long as it takes.
Yeah. That sounds cool, man. You're speaking about so much that I'm so interested in, and I'm definitely wanting to learn more about a lot of this stuff. I love the vision. What did you say? Prayer, meditation, and vision. That's huge.
Yeah, there's 3 tools. And I'd say that 95% of the people in AA pray. Mm-hmm. And most of us have what the Asians would say, the chatter of 1,000 monkeys. Yeah. That when it comes to meditation, we got this constant chatter of what I call the itty bitty shitty committee upstairs. Yeah. It's just going on in all the different voices. And, because people are trying to do mind of no mind meditation, what they call Mushin meditation. That's not the kind of meditation that Bill Wilson taught. Bill Wilson taught guided meditation, whole different kind of meditation. So think about prayer number 1 we just talked about. Patience, tolerance, kindness, and love, right? So I think if I'm the tornado roaring through people's lives, who's the first person I hit is my wife. So I'll think, okay, what does it look like to be patient with Brent? Well, if I'm in my office and she comes into the office door, in the old days, I would swing towards her, turning my body because the door is to my right, on my right shoulder.
Yeah.
So I would stop whatever I'm doing and I'd look over at her. And because she's interrupting me in my alcoholic, self-centered, selfish mind, my answer would probably be, what?
Yeah.
I'd be kind of short and curt, like, why are you interrupting me? Right?
Yeah.
So when I'm working on my vision for patience, I could react that way. Or how about this? I turn, and as I'm turning, I call it the turret, like I'm pointing the cannon to give it the blaster.
Yeah.
Gives me that split second to think of, no, be nice, Dave. So as I'm spinning towards to face her, instead of going, what? I go, yeah, baby, what can I do for you?
Yeah. It's good stuff.
It's a simple little vision, but that's patient. Not only is it patient, it's tolerant, kind, and loving.
Yeah, it deepens
right?
it deepens the whole 10th step process, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And the beauty is I don't have to remake that vision. If it worked yesterday, it'll work today. I've been using the same vision for my wife for months and months and months and months.
Nice.
Right. Until one day I'm sure I will screw it up. That's my track record.
Yeah.
And when I do, I just tweak the vision a little bit. Say, oh, there was a scenario that caught you off guard. Why? And I call it a postmortem. I go back and I pull it apart and I find out what caused me to act inappropriately from my vision. And I figure it out. And then I say, okay, let's tweak the vision. And I add something new to the vision. And then that becomes my vision that I'll bring into my morning meditation every morning.
Explain that a little bit. Like, for an example, let's go into that real quick.
Okay. I was on the phone a couple months back, talking to a sponsee that was in, crisis du jour or whatever it happened to be with the sponsee. You know how they get. And so I'm intense, I'm focused, and I have kind of ADD. So when I have to really work hard at focusing, and my wife comes, and the unwritten rule, it's an unwritten rule, but she knows if my office door is closed, I need some privacy. I'm doing something important.
Yeah.
Right. And so the door pops open and my wife is standing there. Right. And I'm trying to focus. And then she knocks on the door jamb because I'm focusing on what he's saying to me, not on the fact that my wife is there at the door. Right. Mm-hmm. And so because I was dealing with something serious with his sponsee, my guard was down. I was trying to give him 100% of my attention. Oh. And I reverted back to the old behavior and said, what? Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. So now I had to modify that vision. So the way I've modified the vision is if I'm in that situation, right, I'll be, before I go in and close the door in my office. So if he calls me up and says, yeah, my wife just left me or whatever, I'll be like, oh man, that's really, really bad. Tell me about it. And I'll walk out and I'll find my wife and I'll point at my phone and then I'll point it towards my office. She now knows I'm going into my office. This is an important phone call. Unless somebody's bleeding, do not interrupt me, basically.
Nice.
But it took the dust to settle, and I had to go to my wife after I made the amends to her and say, honey, I'm sorry, you caught me off guard. I had to tell her, I was working with this guy, something very important had gone down in his life. I was trying to give him 100% attention. How about this? And we came up with this agreement that this is what I would do before I locked myself in my office. Because she had no idea that when the door was closed, I was talking to a sponsee until I told her about that. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I wouldn't have interrupted you had I known that. Yeah. And so we put our heads together and came up with this as a way. And that's something that for anybody that's in a relationship, my wife and I, the reason we're still married coming up on 40 years is because after every time that we have what I call a knockdown drag out, I do a postmortem on it. And I go back and I pull it apart and figure out what occurred. And then I go to her and I have a conversation and I say something to the effects of, honey, I really hated where we went in this argument and I want to never go through that again. So what can we do to avoid that ever happening again? Yeah. And we put our heads together, and out of that, my wife and I have a whole bunch of rules, marriage rules. For example, there's people literally all over the world that use rule number 1 as it's written. And rule number 1 is written, no matter what happens, it's Dave's fault. Now, what the hell are we going to do about it? My wife and I used to spend hours arguing over, well, it's your fault. No, it's my fault. No, it's your fault. Finally one day I said, you know what, honey? It'll always be my fault. I'll take the heat.
That's awesome.
Now let's get to the fixing part. What are we going to do about it? Yeah. And so, like I might call. It happened not too long ago, I called a sponsee of mine. I said, "Hey man, what's going on?" And he's like, "Man, were you in trouble last night?" I said, "What did I do?" And he starts telling me, "Well, it was your fault." And this was the background. And so we had a good laugh. And then I said, "Well, what did you decide to do about it?"
Yeah.
And that way we both learn, that it's not about placing blame. It's about how do you fix the problem?
Hey man, yeah.
Bottom line.
It's funny, I'd recently, over the last couple months, it's so easy to get into like the need to be right. You get what I mean? Like, it's like
Sure.
you'll completely lose touch with the reason this whole thing started, just because now I'm freaking right. You know what I mean? Like, and this is just all it is about, right? And it's like it's how much that separates you from your significant other. It's crazy.
Yeah, especially in relationships. My relationship, that I had to watch when I was a kid growing up was between my alcoholic father and mother, right? And my dad came into the program in 1976, right? And, I hate to take his inventory, but he was pretty dry for a long, long, long time. And it became very obvious that my mom and dad really didn't belong together. And so he moved to California and she stayed in New Jersey, and they stayed married till the day he died. So if you ask my parents, they were married till my dad died. But the relationship, they were living on opposite coasts, and that was too close for each other. And he'd fly back every 6 months and to visit my mom. And after about a week, they'd start to fight, and then she'd throw him out of the house and he'd go back to California. Yeah. So I didn't have great examples on how to have a relationship. So when I was growing up, literally in AA, because I got sober as a teenager, I'm like, how do I have a relationship? Well, I used what I was taught. I used the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, the 12 concepts, and the 6 warranties. And that's how I do it. And, for 35 years, my wife and I have been going to what are called couples meetings, where you actually practice using the 12 steps, traditions, concepts, and warranties in your relationship. So it's not like a normal AA meeting where you're talking about how the step applies to you. You're talking about how does that step apply to us as a couple, and how do you work it together? And man, it's life-changing. And we moved down here to Texas. There wasn't any couples meeting, so we started one. It went online during COVID, and it's still online. We meet every Monday at 6:30 Central Time. And I've literally seen couples that are on the way to the divorce attorney. They swung by the couples meeting, and they're still married today.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, one of the couples that I'm thinking of just celebrated 16 years of marriage last week.
Wow.
And they'll tell you it's just because of the couples meeting.
Wow.
Practicing the traditions and concepts in the relationship.
That's awesome. Me and my that's awesome, man. I'm interested in getting some of that info. I don't know if you'd want to share it on here, but after we get finished talking,
sure. It's a Zoom meeting. I'm happy to give it to you. And and
is
it's
that
funny,
for anybody?
Is
that for anybody that would be willing? I mean, is anybody interested?
Yeah.
Okay. If you want to, go ahead and put the
open meeting. We practice the group consciences. You can bring any literature that's either from AA or Al-Anon.
Okay.
All right. And we follow the third tradition, the long form of the third tradition. And that's why it's an open meeting. And some people, there's 2 AAs. Some of them it's 1 AA and 1 Al-Anon. Sometimes it's 2 Al-Anons. Sometimes it's 1 AA and nothing, that their wife doesn't do anything in the program. Yeah. It's about, are you willing to work the 12 steps and try to practice these in your relationship to get better? And it's the only really foundational requirement that we have.
Wow.
But if you come to my house, I have a disabled son, right? He lives above the garage now. And, but if you're in our house for more than a couple hours, somebody's going to say, I make a motion. Say, okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second? And here's the second. And literally we vote like we're in a business meeting, like an AA business meeting. I'm the father of the house, but that gives me 0 rights. I get 1 vote. Yeah. Same thing in my marriage with my wife. We operate under the rule of 2 yeses or 1 no. It takes both of us saying yes. If either one of us says no, the answer is no. We don't do it. Right? I can't flex in my muscles because I'm the father, or I make more money or whatever. It doesn't matter. We're a partner. We're a team. And rules like that have literally revolutionized my relationship. And because it's based on the 12 steps and the traditions and what the program teaches, we've been able to face horrible, unbelievable travesties and tragedies, and we get through it just fine.
Wow. Interesting. Wow. I've never even considered doing a group conscious at the house. That's funny. I mean, that sounds like it would be.
First, you got to teach them how to do it.
Yeah.
Then you get to watch the dynamics. I I have two boys, and when they were both living at home, one of them, the older one's now, he's grown up and he's out of the house now. But when they were little, one of them, you could see him whispering, and I'd hear him whispering and be like, okay, here comes something fun. And one of them would go, I make a motion. And I go, okay, what's the motion? And they would all go out for ice cream. And the other one would go, I second that motion. Right?
That's funny, dude. That's awesome.
Next thing you know, we're on our way to the Marble Stop to get ice cream. Right?
That is freaking awesome, man. Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. So it's fun. So me and my wife and our sponsors are married, and we have several other people from our home group about a year or so ago went through the Dave and Polly. It was applying the 12 traditions to your relationship. That workbook.
Dave and Polly Pistol.
Yeah, and that was it was real. A lot of cool stuff on that. But let me ask you this: the 6 warranties that you're talking about. What's this all about? The 6 warranties. I've never heard of this.
Oh, there we go. It's funny. I was at that Monterey conference. I was talking about the warranties, and a lady with, I want to say she had 47 or 48 years came up to me, and there's always like a receiving line for the speakers after you talk.
Yeah.
And she's in line, and when she gets up to me, she says, I knew about the 12 steps, and she goes, I kind of heard about the 12 traditions, and then she literally takes her finger, and she's probably like 80 years old, and she pokes me in the chest, and she goes, but I don't know what these concepts and warranty crap is about. And she turned around and walked away. She stormed off. And I started laughing. The warranties are part of the 12th concept. It is built around 6 warranties. The right of decision, the right of participation, right? So they're really important, right? So the minority opinion being heard, and how nobody's going to have imperious power over anyone else, right? That's what took my power away as the alpha male in my own home.
Wow.
Is just because I'm the father, I have a spiritual requirement to be a spiritual leader, but I don't have the right to run roughshod over the rest of my family. They're members of the family and they get votes, same as my vote. Wow. And we let God speak through the group conscience, and we stand on spiritual principles. And if it's in line with spiritual principles, how can we make a mistake, right?
Yeah. Wow. That's huge. Man.
Yeah, it's a kind of a manifestation of the 3rd step.
Wow.
We're literally turning our will and our life over to the care. It's a caring God. And if we follow traditions and concepts and everybody gets a vote, we trust that the group conscience, God's going to speak through it, and we're going to be on sound spiritual ground.
Nice. Man, there's so much stuff that's I could think of. I'm sitting here. I got all this stuff wrote down on my paper. I'm sitting here. I see like 5 or 6 podcast episodes through all this.
I work for God. We'll see what he's got in store. I'm game if you are.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's cool. Like it's there's just so much stuff out there too. And I'm like you. Here's my experience. Okay, like what you were talking about with the vision and like would you say tweaking the vision a little bit?
Yeah,
I'm like that, right? I am, I guess you could say some people, not everyone goes that deep with everything. A lot of people are just like, it is what it is. And I'm not, I'm more of I go deep. I'm pretty conscious of most of the stuff that, I shouldn't say most. There's probably no telling how much stuff I'm unconscious of, but I'm a pretty conscious person for the most parts of the day. So I'm like that, man. But a lot of people that I know, in recovery aren't that deep. They're like, it is what it is, and they're not thinking about like a vision and tweaking it and all that, And so I admire people that are more like us. Like as far as like I can connect with you, I can relate to what you're saying. When a lot of people are like,
well, there's a difference, in AA, and you'll see it. My nickname is Mad Dog. I am a mad dog because I drank like a mad dog.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I used to drink Mad Dog. That's where I got the nickname. Was I'm a mad dog drinker. That was my first Gmail account was maddogdrinker@gmail.com.
Wow.
So I have to. My life is on the line.
Same.
I don't have a choice.
Amen.
AA. You'll see people in AA that, and it's not for me to judge, but I've seen people in AA that I can't. You listen to their drinking story. I'm wondering why they're there. They're not. They don't have to do this stuff to stay alive like I do.
Amen.
And all my teachers are dead. Right, the people that carried the message to me died a long time ago. I mean, I buried I think 8 or 9 sponsors.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
I've been at this a long time. I literally grew up in the rooms. So when your teachers died and you start looking around and you start going, well, who else can I learn from? Where's the next thing? You always want to try to find somebody that's got more time. Well, when you get up into after 4 decades, it's kind of hard to find somebody that's got more time than you. And then you start thinking, well, what about guys younger than me that are just operating on a spiritual program? And I start talking to them, and they're great in recovery, but they don't have anything new. And I want to, you got to grow in your spirit. It says under step 10, right?
Yeah.
Our next function is grow in understanding and effectiveness. Yeah. So how do I grow? Well, ultimately the teacher is God. So I'm constantly going to God and saying, God, teach me something new, for whatever problem I have. And he puts it on my heart, and I'll say, okay, let me try this, see if it works. And I do something, and if it works for me, then I guinea pig it on my sponsees. And when they have a similar situation, and if it works with them, then I write it into a formal exercise and I start to teach it. And when I do a retreat, I'll teach, and like the Wilson House, the next step, emotional sobriety. Mm-hmm. I wrote 12 spiritual exercises, one for each of the 12 steps, to hit the steps from a different angle, because we're dealing with people that had been through the work, and I wanted to be able to challenge them with something new, so their ego didn't know what was coming down the road, that they could have a new experience with those 12 steps.
Wow, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it's exciting.
And all that,
yeah, it's exciting.
It all comes from God, right?
Yeah, I'm always wanting to, learn, just discover more, like it's just, plus I would get bored if it was just the same old stuff. If I still read the book how I used to read it and all that, it's just, come on, man. Like, it's not, I need a new experience with it. Right. And go ahead.
Well, there's 2 major meetings that I go to that are on Zoom. There's a Tuesday night men's spiritual meeting, and then there's a Saturday morning men's meeting. And after those 2 meetings, there's a group of us. We stay on the meeting after the Zoom meeting's over with. And I've noticed that the longer I'm sober, the more people, right? It says in the big book, what's my job as a sponsor? My job is to lay the spiritual toolkit at the guy's feet, right? Mm. It's his job to pick up the toolkit. So all of us have these spiritual tools, but we're woefully inadequate at using the tools. So I noticed that I would get these phone calls from sponsees, and they'd say, oh, I got this problem du jour, whatever it happens to be. And I'll be like, okay, well, what did you do about it? And they'll go, well, I don't know. I picked up the phone and called you. And I'm like, well, dude, I'm not your trunk monkey. Are you familiar with the trunk monkey analogy?
No, it's this.
Do yourself a favor. Everybody that's listening to this, do yourself a favor. Go onto YouTube and Google trunk monkey. There was a car dealership, I think it was in Chicago, that 15 years ago put out a series of ads called Trunk Monkey ads. They are some of the funniest ads. I go back and watch them once a year. I almost wet my pants laughing so hard at some of these ads where there's this chimpanzee in the trunk and there's a button on the dashboard, and and I'm like, well, dude, I'm not your trunk monkey. Yeah. I've taught you these tools. Why aren't you using the tools? And so on those meetings, after the meeting, we get somebody to volunteer. Okay, who screwed up today? And somebody will raise their hand and say, I screwed up today. And they'll tell us the scenario. And they'll share the scenario, and we'll say, okay, what tools did you have in your toolbox that you failed to use? And if they can't think of what the tools are, then the rest of the guys that are on the meeting will all offer the tools that we all know to use. And we're like, oh, that's right. I could have done a gratitude list, or I could have written this inventory. I could have used prayer number 11 for this, or whatever. And we talk about the tools, because that's the deal for long-term sobriety. It's once you've been through the 12 steps and you have sobriety, you're sober, you're in a recovered state. Yeah. How do you stay in that state, and how do you grow is by getting better and better at working with the tools. Mm.
So it makes all the sense in the world. It makes all kinds of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we do lots of work on the tools, and what are the tools, and then I've thrown in a bunch of tools that I've learned from relationships, like Lav and Zap, and I mean there's a whole bunch of them. Q-tip. There's probably 15 tools for relationships that we use.
Wow. It's funny because I'm sitting here consciously going back on, like, particularly the last couple of situations in my personal life that's happened where, like, I'd wished I'd really done it different. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
And like I look back on it and I can see how, like, I didn't have tools that I was utilizing other than, like, prayer at the the beginning of the day, but it wasn't specifying. It also didn't have vision, like in those moments. Even though I have kind of had, like what you're using, vision, I kind of go to my ideals for that, right? That's kind of what
Sure.
when I use the ideals, I think of the vision is what you're calling vision. But like, it's funny how some days I can just wake up and that's like non-existent for me in certain moments. So I'm thinking about tweaking how tweaking certain stuff may actually. It's just deepening the process, right?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Just because Saturday morning men's meeting was this morning, right? Yeah. And we stayed afterwards, and one of the guys that stayed after was Johnny, and I said, "Who screwed up?" And Johnny raised his hand, and he's like, I said, "Well, what'd you screw up on?" He goes, "Well, it's a long and distinguished list." And I said, "Well, just pick one." Yeah. And he's like, "Well, I was talking to my wife and we got into this argument, and then we got into another argument and we got a third argument." And I said, "Okay, what tools did you use?" And he started talking about some of the tools that he didn't use. And I said, "Just out of curiosity, what time did you talk to your wife?" And he got this look on his face because he knows that one of the relationship rules that I have is you don't ever talk about anything important late at night, because it always ends in an argument.
Nice. Yeah.
Right. And he's like, "Well, it was 9 o'clock at night." And I'm like, "Well, there you go." You avoided the whole thing if you didn't try to have a serious conversation when everybody's tired and agitated already.
Wow. Yeah, and
you just want to go to bed.
Experience, huh? You've just learned that tool over.
Absolutely.
Wow.
I got the scars to prove it.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow. Man. Yeah. That's cool.
And if you don't have people in your life, let me make a bold statement.
Yeah.
You don't have people in your life that you can do this with.
Yeah.
You're shortchanging yourself.
Amen.
Right? What's the first word in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous?
We.
Yeah. You cannot do this singularly. Yeah. And I always like to say, the wolf picks off the sheep on the outside of the herd. You got to get right in the middle of the herd and stay in the middle of the herd. Yeah. So to this day, I talk to 6 alcoholics every single day, minimum. Because I got to stay in the middle of the herd.
Nice.
And I make sure that the alcoholics I'm talking to are what I call deep wells. If I'm going to call somebody and I know that they're going to co-sign my BS, I can talk to them, but they're not going to count as one of my 6. I want 6 people that when I call up and they say, "Hey, Dave, how you doing?" And I say, "Fine." They go, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa. I can hear it in your voice. Yeah. Dude, you aren't fine. Cough it up. What's really going on?"
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Those are the kind of people I need to talk to every day, where it's got some depth and weight. Right? Yeah. And I want people that will call me out and say, "Well, what tool did you use on it? When was the last time you wrote inventory? How was your prayer and meditation this morning?" If I'm your sponsor and you call me like I'm your trunk monkey with a problem, one of the first questions out of my mouth is, "How was your prayer and meditation this morning?" Yeah. Because I don't care what the problem is. Yeah. The answer is spiritual, right? Its solution is in the relationship with the power greater than themselves.
Amen.
And if they say that they haven't talked to God, "Oh, I didn't say my prayers this morning," you know what they hear next? "Tell God I said hello," and I hang up on them. Bang.
That's awesome.
I'm not gonna waste my time talking to their disease, to their ego.
Yeah. And you're
Go
not the
get
power.
On your knees.
Yeah, you're not the power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Go get on your knees, talk to God, and then call me back, and we'll have a laugh about it.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. So I'm just interested in like what kind of literature. I'm sure it's changed over the years, but like currently, what kind of literature do you like doing? Like morning just in general. What kind of I know we talked about the reading. Me personally, I'm not a good reader, right? But I still have daily.
Yes.
I remember I'd heard on Mark Houston's one of his talks. He had the 365 Tao, which really was awesome. That's an awesome book. The Power of Now was a book that changed my life in the beginning. Obviously, the big book, but like, what's some of your favorite books?
Well, in my office, there's I call it making sawdust. It's spiritual for me to do woodworking.
Yeah,
I made a rack that my printer sits on and stuff, and underneath my printer are 365 Tao and all those books.
Yeah,
virtually anything that's done by Richard Rohr.
Yeah,
is top. The current books that I'm reading, From Survival to Recovery, it's an Al-Anon book.
Wow.
All right. I got the 12 and 12. I got something called Oneness by Jeffrey Moss, Great Spiritual Principles Shared by All Religions.
What's
The
that
Way
one
of
called?
Forgiveness.
What did you say that one's called? What'd you say?
Oneness by Jeffrey Moss, called Great Spiritual Principles Shared by All Religions.
Yeah.
The Way of Forgiveness. Grace, which is Max Lucado.
Nice.
The unpopular studies on the first three steps.
Wow.
God Moments for Men, Henry Tebow, Thomas Keating, You Can't Make Me Angry by Paul O.
Wow.
Emotional Sobriety, The Next Frontier, which is a Grapevine book. Our Great Responsibility, which is the new Conference Approves that was just put out. Stake Your Claim, Emmett Fox. The Sarcastic Big Book, a fantastic spiritual book called Godspeed, The Journey Through the Scriptures. I'm currently reading the Daily Meditations by Richard Rohr.
Nice. Which one is it? Is it And Yes? Is that the one you're reading? He has one called something. Yes.
Yes, and.
Yes, and yeah. That's an awesome book.
Yes, and it's Daily Meditations by Richard Rohr.
I love that.
Emmett Fox is always a big one for me. All of those guys were my teachers. But like I said, all my teachers are dead.
Yeah.
So, now I rely very heavily on what I call God with skin. Yeah. People in the program, and God speaks through them, and I kind of go, oh, that's cool. That's good. Let me work with that. And then I take it into prayer and meditation, and then God will give me something that'll touch my heart, and I know I'm on the right path.
Wow.
Another book that I read on a regular basis is the Little Red Book.
Yeah.
Which is a Hazleton production.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking the Carl Jung book, the Red Book or something. But you're talking about the Little Red Book, the old recovery book, yeah.
Yeah, which was Ralph Fowle, the anonymous priest.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, wrote that. So, Thich Nhat Hanh.
I love Thich Nhat Hanh,
Yeah. So it all depends. And what the key is, as you can tell by all the different titles, I don't allow myself to get stale.
Yeah.
So, and let me put a thing out there for Al-Anon. If you're going to be an effective sponsor, you're going to need Al-Anon. Because otherwise, what I've found is you'll start caring more about your sponsee's sobriety than they care about it for themselves. And you'll start acting like it and doing some inappropriate stuff. So, for the first 13 years, it was one program. AA and Al-Anon were the exact same program. There was one piece of literature, and it was the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then somebody got a resentment, and 13 years later, Al-Anon split off. But I went to my first Al-Anon meeting in 1976 because my dad drugged me to it. It was an Alateen meeting, actually.
Yeah.
And I now go to a men's Al-Anon meeting on Tuesday mornings, and about half my sponsees go, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is really cool stuff. And it's taken them to the next level. I learned to get sober in AA. I learned how to grow up in Al-Anon. Yeah. Two other books I want to throw a shout out for, The Way of Love and The Way of Gratitude, which is a series of different authors in there, but the whole book is basically on either gratitude or love. And those books you can just pick up, and they're little, maybe 3-page by one author on the subject. And I can chew on that, and I'll work with that for an entire week.
Yeah.
So
that's cool.
Cool stuff.
That's good stuff. I had the privilege of my first grand sponsor when I first got sober was he'd done a lot of Al-Anon work, and I don't remember if he was currently. I think he had just did it in the past, but he a lot of the principles he'd shared with us over the years was all Al-Anon stuff. And I have a buddy in my community right now it swears by it. He just went through there's a inventory process that he talks about, the Al-Anon inventory process that's huge. He's talking about so I'm interested in checking some of that stuff out here soon. Yeah, man, this has been great.
They got a book called The Blueprint for Progress. I always start with the big book. Period.
Okay.
I can add whatever I want to what's in the big book, but I never violate it. I always do the 5 inventories from the big book on the 4 step, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll add stuff to it. And there's a wonderful series of questions in the Blueprint for Progress. If you try to do the Blueprint for Progress and think you're going to stay sober with that, it's probably going to kill you.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't go deep enough. You got to know the basics. But once you know the basics, they wrote another book which is even better, which is I think a super addition to what's in the big book. It's called Reaching for Personal Freedom. It's a book on inventory. It's a whole nother series of questions. It's light years, head and shoulders above, better than the Blueprint for Progress.
And that's Al-Anon as well.
It's Al-Anon as well.
Okay.
But here's the deal. You can figure out how to get sober, but if you want emotional sobriety, you're going to have some childhood wounds. A lot of us find people that are in recovery that we fall in love with. There's a whole bunch of my friends that are married to alcoholics. You're going to have Al-Anon if you're going to be married to an alcoholic, right? Because you've got both traits. You got your own alcoholic behaviors, but you also have Al-Anon coping skills. If you grew up in an alcoholic household, which a lot of us did, you're going to have alcoholic traits that led to your drinking. But once your drinking is fixed, you still have those traits. Well, how do you learn to get rid of those traits? You can use 6, 7, 8, and 9 and ask God to help you remove them. But some of those traits didn't start to get removed until I started working with Al-Anon and got to the root, because they were literally Al-Anon issues more than they were connected to my drinking. They were the ism from alcoholism, right? So, yeah.
Nice. It kind of brings me to another question I had earlier, and for the listeners, I know we're all over the place with this, but I think it's cool just to kind of get everyone. This is my favorite stuff right here, man. Yeah, to let everybody know.
That's how my mind works.
Yeah. To let everybody know, it's interesting for all the listeners. Me and you, the first time we ever talked was like 20, 30 minutes before this phone call, right? Yeah. That's cool. It's cool how we can just, relate like this. But to go back,
we're brothers.
Yeah. And it's funny because
we're family.
Absolutely, man. And I mean, just through this conversation is like inspired me in so many different ways. So I realized, like, I love conversations that make me realize, like, man, it's time to get busy. Like, I stay busy. Don't get me wrong. I do a lot of stuff, but it's like, man, there's so much into this that I'm not aware of. Right. Thank God for that.
Yeah.
And which brings me to another thing. You were talking about the forgiveness prayer. What's that all about?
Yeah. Between column 3 and column 4 in an inventory, there's a forgiveness prayer.
Okay.
And 99.9% of the people in the program that I talk to have never heard of it. They don't know anything about it. The key to the 4th step, to resentments, is in forgiveness. And if nobody's ever told you that, let me be the first person to tell it to you. If you don't find forgiveness in the process, the resentment is still going to dog you. You're going to bury it down deep, but it's going to resurface and kick your butt. It all hinges on forgiveness. And here's how you can prove it. We got our program from the Oxford Group. What was the Oxford Group teaching? 1st century Christian principles.
Yeah.
Right? And if you read the New Testament of the Bible, it's all about forgiveness.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
I hate to get religious on you, but what did Jesus say when he's hanging on the cross?
Amen.
Forgive them, Father, for what they know, what they do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you look in Matthew, there's a parable about if you've got something against your brother, but you come to the altar to pray, leave your offering at the altar and go make it right with your brother, then come back and talk to God.
Nice.
Right? It's a foundational principle in the early AAs. When you read our history books, they spent a long time talking about forgiveness. It's huge. Well, between column 3 and column 4, there's a written description of a prayer, and it's the forgiveness prayer. Now, it's one of my pet peeves. A lot of people have misconstrued the prayer, and they call it the sick man's prayer.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right? Have you ever heard that expression?
I was about to call it that. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what does the prayer actually say?
Help us show them, right? Yeah, so it's us, right? It's about
Help us.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are the sick man.
Yeah.
It's about you.
Yeah.
Right? And what do most alcoholics do? They think, well, I'm going to have to forgive that sick son of a bitch.
Yeah.
No, you're going to have to forgive you. The analogy I like to use is a prison, right? It all depends which side of the cell door you're sitting on, right?
Yeah.
The prisoner is in prison, but so is the guard.
Yeah.
You're both in prison. So if you want to get out of prison, you got to unlock the door, right? And then you can walk away from the prison.
Yeah.
The whole purpose of resentment is for me to get free so it stops eating my lunch. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody at the meeting talk about this resentment and how it's kicking their butt? And then an old timer will say, I bet you the person you're mad at isn't thinking about you at all.
Yeah.
And you're spending your entire life thinking about what they did to you.
Yeah. So true.
The problem is not theirs, it's ours.
Yeah.
So let's forgive and move on.
Yeah.
Get free.
Amen.
And then Mark used to say the expression all the time. Mark used to always say, how free do you want to be?
Yeah. I loved it when he said that. Yeah.
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 Yep.
Wow, that's cool, man. Yeah. And that's what this is all about, right? It's like a shift. There's that shift that happens between the third and the fourth. You know, you got this solid case on the first three columns, right? And then it's that, but from 3 to 4, you're like, wow, just mind blown, right? And
and that comes from the forgiveness prayer, because it's a 12-part prayer.
Okay.
Most people don't realize that, but when I teach it, I go through all 12 parts. And when you do the 12 pieces of the prayer, in the process of writing, it's a written prayer, like all our inventories are all written. In the process of writing it, I can't tell you the number of times where I get about halfway through writing the prayer, and I realize, why am I writing this? I'm not mad at this person anymore.
Yeah.
And the forgiveness has occurred, and I'm free.
Yeah.
I finish writing the prayer anyway, and I say the prayer to God, and put in the God box and the whole 9 yards of what I do. But I mean, if you're still carrying something after you've done a 4-step in written resentment inventory, you got to get free, and I can show you how to get free, because it's literally life changing. Yeah.
And so let me ask you this. I always get this question a lot, and this is, so I'll have a guy that thinks like, oh, so I'm just not, I'll try to tell him like, it's not necessarily like, I'm not always going to agree with everything everyone does, right? But I'm not allowing a resentment to harbor in me, right? I'm not feeding it and nurturing it every day. What's your experience with all that?
Well, what's the number one offender?
Resentment, yeah.
All right. What does it do to alcoholics?
It kills us.
It kills us.
Yeah.
So it's pretty damn important, wouldn't you say?
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that the Big Book gives us 3 separate tools for resentments?
Okay, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
I'm blowing your mind.
I possibly do. I'm curious where you're going with it. Yeah, but yeah.
Well, no, there's literally 3 very specific instructions for resentment.
Okay.
To be used in 3 different locations at 3 different times, 3 different tools in our toolbox for resentment. Right? You got the normal tool that everybody thinks of when they think of resentment is 4-column inventory, right?
Yeah.
When do we use that tool? We use that tool when a resentment has got its claws into us, right? And it's been carrying us and kicking our butt for a certain length of time, right?
Yeah.
Then we have the spot check inventory, prayer number 2, right? We watch for what?
For resentment, yeah. In step 10, yeah.
Selfish dishonesty, resentment, and fear.
Yep.
Right? There's 6 instructions after that statement. Right?
Yeah.
We ask God at once to remove it from us, and there's 5 other things that we're supposed to do there. Yeah. Completely separate tool, used at a separate time, so that the resentment doesn't get its claws into us.
Yeah.
All right? So let's say you do a 5th step, and you share with your sponsor that, this bully that used to kick the crap out of you, and yada, 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 and you write the resentment inventory, you do the forgiveness prayer, and it's gone, you're free. And then you go to Thanksgiving, and your cousin's there, and he was there when the bully used to pick on you, and he starts telling the story of how the bully used to pick on you, and he used to think it was so funny, and you start to feel that anger start to well up in you.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. What tool do you use then? That's a resentful thought, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 10, step 10, yeah.
Well, no, it's not step 10, it's page 119.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, I'm thinking we go
it's
to
the gratitude list.
Okay, and that's on 119.
Yeah, there's a gratitude list, and people hear in meetings. I mean, have you ever heard in meetings people talking about a gratitude list?
Yeah, sure.
99% of the people that I talk to have no idea that it comes right out of the Big Book.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Well, you got your Big Book there.
That's right. I'm on 119. I'm on 119 right now. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Let's see if you can find it.
Let's see.
It's the 4th line down on the page. Starts when resentful thoughts come.
Oh, when resentful thoughts come, try to pause and count your blessings. Nice.
What do you call that? That's called a gratitude list, right?
Yeah. I'm going to underline that one.
Right?
Yeah.
It just doesn't say gratitude list, so people don't know to use it.
So that's what I was talking about. This is the 3rd place.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the 3rd tool for resentments. And that's what I was talking about. After the meetings, we sit around and we talk about what tools should you have used.
Yeah.
And so if somebody's telling me about if one of my sponsees is talking, and I know we've covered this resentment from 5 years ago when he did his fifth step with me 5 years ago, and he starts telling me some story about something that he used to be resentful about, and something started to flare up in him, I'm like, okay, what tool did you use? He damn well better say the gratitude list. Because you had a resentful thought. Well, if he didn't do the gratitude list, you know what came next? He got resentful, which would have been a spot check. That would have been the second time to catch it. If he didn't catch it then, and it turned into a full-blown resentment. Now he's resentful, and he's going to have to go write a four-column inventory.
Yeah. I think where the question was is like I have a lot of guys that will ask me like, does that mean I'm just supposed to like this person? Like, say you're somebody at work. Yeah, that's what I always try to tell them. It's like just because you don't approve, or I'm saying approve for lack of a better word. Like, I always say like resentment technically is we're allowing this. It's growing inside of us, right? It's festering, right? But like that don't mean I'm necessarily going to like every single thing that happens from everybody. I think a lot of people get that idea, and I'm like, no, that's not it. So a lot of people will be like, am I resentful just because I don't like this?
Yeah, there's a funny story about that. In 2010, I slipped on black ice and broke my back. Right, so I was disabled for 5 years.
Wow.
Couldn't work.
Wow.
And while I was recovering and trying to figure out how to get my legs to work again and going through that process, I got a phone call from GSO, and they asked me to go to Russia to teach the traditions and concepts to the Russian delegation at their annual meeting for the GSO in Russia.
Wow.
Right, and so I fly over with one of Mark Houston's sponsees, J.R. Harmon. We fly over to Moscow. And I said, well, listen, since I'm in Moscow, it's a big city. Let me do a big book workshop before we go out on the weekend to the GSO to teach the traditions and the concepts. And so I'm in the middle of doing this big book workshop in this Politburo Coliseum, so there's hundreds of people in this thing, and I'm doing the workshop. And so I would say a line, and then it would get translated. And I'd say another line and it get translated. And I'm talking about the 4-step and the resentment inventory. And I say the line and it doesn't get translated. And I'm like, this is weird. I look over at the translator and I said, is there an issue? And he says, that word that you use. And I said, what word? He goes, say the line again. And so I said the line again, and it ended it with resentment.
Yeah.
He says, yeah, that word. Yeah. What's the one word that they don't have in the Russian language? Resentment.
Wow. Yeah.
Talk about a missing word from the big book. You know how important that word is?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well,
so
go ahead.
So, hang on a second. So what I did was I stopped for a second and said a quick prayer to God, and I don't know what possessed me, but I went back to the original Greek, and I said, just stick with me, follow this, and I started translating from the original Greek on what the word resentment, go back to resentare, and I worked my way forward. And when everybody in the audience started nodding their heads, then I knew that they understood what the word resentment was. And then we were able to continue the workshop.
Wow. Interesting. Oh, wow. That's funny. My sponsor went there for a workshop. He did like I think it was maybe a 4-step. I'm probably, botching it. But I think it was a 4-step workshop that he went to Russia for. And he said that the translator wasn't sure about the word surrender, which was interesting. It's like, wow, they don't have. So resentment's an interesting. So that is, you made a good point. So I wonder how, which brings me to another point where I have a friend of mine that's from Germany that she got sober in Germany, and she's been sober a long time. She lives in the States now. But I'd heard her when she shared her story say that, the translation for the Germans, the German translation isn't very good, which is what you were talking about. Like if you don't have a word for the resentment, how do you even translate it, right? I'm interested in that. That's funny.
Here's a little history. You know how most of the translations came about?
How's that?
The 459 in Manhattan in New York is right down the street from the UN building.
Yeah.
And Bill Wilson knew some of the people at the UN. So when it came time to do a major translation, like the Spanish translation, the German translation, Bill Wilson would get his friend from the UN to send a UN translator over, not an alcoholic, just an earth person, and say, hey, could you translate this book? And they would translate it. And they didn't understand because they weren't alcoholic on the emphasis on spirituality and the relationship with the power greater than yourself.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of translations that are pretty poor.
Yeah.
And there's some underground translations that have been going on retranslate the Spanish to make it more accurate to the Big Book as it's written. There's a kid from Ukraine that translated the Russian Big Book again and made it much more true to what the Big Book is.
Wow. Interesting.
There's a Greek guy that did it, and several of them have reached out to me and have translated the stuff, the workshops and the handouts and stuff that I've done.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, are you okay if we translate it? I'm like, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, translate away, knock yourself out.
Yeah.
Have at it.
Nice. Interesting. Which it's funny because I remember hearing Don Pritz talking about in one of his talks. He said I think he was probably one of the guys that was supposedly responsible for bringing AA there, right, to Russia.
Yes.
So
yes.
I'd heard him talking in one of his talks, and he was like, he was like, I think what it was like the 80s or something, right? Wasn't it the 80s whenever? Yeah. So he was like, until the 80s, that if you were an alcoholic in their society, if you were a doctor, you'd never ever be a doctor ever again. If you were a lawyer, you'd never ever be a lawyer again. Whatever your
sure,
your career was, because they didn't know that there was possible treatment and people that are recovered from alcoholism, right? So it's like, man, when you see the context of that, you're like, man, you see how grateful, like, man, we're blessed. I mean, could you imagine living in a society that isn't even aware of, you could recover from alcoholism?
Sure.
Yeah,
now, my father was an airline pilot.
Okay.
Right? He was like number 4 or 5 in the United States to ever get his pilot's license back after he was diagnosed as an alcoholic. And in 1976, because certain professions in the United States, you actually lose your licensing, your certification when you got diagnosed as an alcoholic. In 1976, World Service approved 3 official subgroups of Alcoholics Anonymous: for doctors, lawyers, and pilots. For lawyers, it's ILAA. For doctors, it's caduceus. The little emblem that doctors wear, the funny little triangular thing with the snake climbing up the pole?
Yeah.
That's called a caduceus.
Okay.
So their 12-step program is called caduceus, and the pilot group is called birds of a feather. And the world's largest birds of a feather meets on Thursday nights about 13 miles from my house.
Wow.
And
wow.
It's pretty cool.
Wow.
So when my company asked me to come down to Texas to run the drug and alcohol program, God's took that and allowed me to teach the FAA Drug and Alcohol School in Denver. And I was able to help carry the message and help a number of different airlines and the Air Force set up their drug and alcohol programs.
Nice.
That all the guys that I drank and drunk with, they're all dead.
Yeah.
Why am I still sober all these years later? Because God's not done with me.
Yeah.
And he's taking me to places where I shouldn't ever have gotten to, and been able to use me so I can help carry the message. So I've helped set up these drug and alcohol programs. I literally wrote the book that's in the Library of Congress for how to recertify a pilot and get their medical back.
Nice.
For drugs and alcohol.
Wow.
And that's, God will take you in, if God says you're going to Nineveh, you're going to Nineveh. He'll put you where you need to be to have the greatest impact in people's lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This podcast
absolutely
is the same way. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's just how God works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I tell people, like, the idea of a podcast had came up several times, and I was like, nah, I don't got time. I don't have, I'm busy with this. I'm sponsoring a lot of guys. I'm, doing all this. And then it kept coming up. And I was like, I guess I'm doing a freaking podcast,
Yeah.
And here it is, man. Like, it's funny because after I've only been doing it since like mid-December. Right. And, I tell guys all the time, it's like, man, like, this is not my idea, right? Like, doing this, like, had I listened to all the negative self-talk I had whenever I first started all this, I still can't go back and listen to a lot of the episodes because I'm like, man, I just can't. I critique myself, and
sure,
so like, it's just one of those situations where, like, clearly God has me doing this, and I don't know for how long. I've enjoyed it. I've had a lot of good feedback. I think it's getting somewhere, and I think it helps a lot of people, man, and it's been cool. I completely get what you're saying.
One final story that's connected to that. Have you ever heard me tell my story? Have you
No.
heard my pitch? Okay.
No.
So I told you about the guy from Chicago that got me the job to come down here, right?
Yeah.
So I come down to Texas and I start teaching the drug and alcohol school for the FAA. And then after 9/11, because I'm an airline pilot, they created a special volunteer force for pilots to carry guns to protect the aviation system in the world.
Wow.
Right. And they were asking for volunteers. And so I volunteered. Well, I had to go online and fill out the application. And part of my story is when I was young and stupid, I got arrested 5 different times for dealing drugs. Drugs were part of my story.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when it came time to fill out the application for the federal government, I told the truth. Right. Filled it out. And I get a phone call a couple months later to go in for my psychological evaluation. And I walk in there and the doctor's sitting behind his desk and he's kind of looking over his glasses and he's reading the computer screen. And he says, well, it says here, marijuana, yes, cocaine, yes, heroin, yes. And he looks over his glasses and he says, you look familiar. And I said, yes, sir, I am familiar. And he goes, where would I know you from? And I said, I gave you your drug and alcohol briefing for the FAA. And you know what he says to me?
That's awesome. Yeah.
He looks at me and he goes, sure, I'll give you a gun. Tell me your story. So
that is freaking
my
awesome.
interview to become a federal officer was to sit down and tell the guy my story of how all those were yeses. Now, only God can take a 5-time convicted drug dealer and today make him not only an airline pilot, but a federal officer. That just doesn't happen without the power of God.
Wow.
You know,
Amen.
So if you're listening to this podcast and you don't think that God can get you sober, that you're unique, let me be the first person to throw up the bullshit flag and say you're absolutely wrong.
Amen.
Our addiction is a disease of isolation, and your addiction is trying to tell you that you're unique. And my sponsor used to call it terminal uniqueness. If you think you're unique and you're like nobody else understands, you're going to die. The moment you get in and you turn to the word we and you realize there's somebody in the rooms that's been where you are, done the exact same thing, and they're free, you realize that you can get free and let God take you where you're supposed to go to make the change that you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Man, it's the coolest ride on the planet.
Amen.
Do not miss that ride.
Amen.
I'm the luckiest man on the planet. I'm telling you.
Wow. And the cool part about it is it's all laid out in the book. You know, it's like you just go through this process and watch what happens. Right? Just keep going and keep going and keep going and watch the miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle, or you just start getting unblocked and everything just take place. It's like, wow.
But it's not free.
No.
It's absolutely not free. And there's 2 lists I make my guys put in their big book. One is a miracles list, because if you do the 12 steps, you're going to experience miracles, things where you didn't see a way out. It worked out better than you could ever imagine. That's a miracle, right? The other list is a gratitude list. When the same type of scenario where you just have so much gratitude that you thought you were going to get divorced and you ended up getting divorced because you found a good counselor and it worked out, or you thought you were going to get your butt kicked when you went to go make this amend and it worked. I mean, so those go on your long-term gratitude list. And you keep those in the front cover of your big book, because I guarantee you, you stay sober long enough, something's going to happen in your life where you're not going to feel the presence of God, and you're going to get into what I call the pit. And you're not going to see a way out. There's going to be no light on the horizon. And you're going to whip out those 2 lists and you're going to look at it and go, wait a minute, God was with me here when I had this and it worked out this way. And he was with me there when that worked out that way. And that list is going to keep you in the hunt for God and lead you out of the pit into the sunlight again.
Wow.
You know, I keep a laminated card on my desk, and all my sponsees know about it. And it says, patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. What I want does not matter. I don't get a vote because I work for God today. If you've worked the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and you've taken a 3rd step, you don't get a vote anymore. You've given up your vote.
Wow.
And because you're working for God. So sobriety is not free. It costs you your vote. But the gifts are better than anything you could have ever written for yourself. Do not, under any circumstances, miss the ride. It's one of the coolest rides that I've ever experienced.
Wow.
And I always tell everybody, don't miss the ride. And if you've never carried the message, if you think you haven't been sober long enough, or you're afraid you're going to hurt somebody, let me put a stop to that right now. You can't hurt anybody more than they've already hurt themselves through drugs and alcohol. So get the heck off of that point and go carry the message. And the first time you have a front row seat to carry the message to somebody and watch this little guy who's shaking and puking, and all of a sudden he gets sober and he works the 12 steps and becomes a useful member of sobriety, and he makes the amends and he cleans up his life and he starts to grow. That is the coolest front row seat of any show you'll ever see. Do not miss the opportunity. it's a ride beyond all rides. It's
Wow.
absolutely wonderful deal.
Amen. Wow, man.
What a great way to end the podcast, right?
Amen, dude. Wow. Appreciate that, man. This whole thing's been cool. It's been very eye opening. I want you to stay on the phone. I'm going to do a little outro real quick. We'll stay on the phone. And I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things before we get off here. So, for all the listeners, like I said earlier, the email address is recoveryrecordings615@yahoo.com for us. Dave, do you want to put your email on there? You want to hold off on that?
Sure. If you want, my email address it's the same one I've had since the 1980s.
Yeah.
aadave1@aol.com.
Say that again.
And I feel Dave1@aol.com.
And that's the number one, not the word, but the
numeric.
Okay.
Yeah, the numeric character. I feel bad for Dave because he gets some really strange emails all over the world.
That's funny, dude.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, appreciate it.
If you ping me and just tell me what you're looking for, will respond. It may be a week or two because I travel for a living and I literally fly all over the world. So,
Nice.
But I will get back to you eventually and get you what you're looking for. And I know literally wherever you are, you're listening to this. I probably know somebody in your area that can help because, like I said, I've carried the message to thousands of people all over this planet, and I know people like the Saturday morning men's meeting. We had men on that call from South Africa all the way through to Thailand and the Philippines and everywhere in between.
Wow.
Right? It goes all the way around the entire planet, and it's all because we're carrying a message right out of the big book, and people are hungry for it. There's a guy in South Africa gets up at 3:00 in the morning to go to our meetings on Tuesday night.
Nice.
Right. So, I mean, how free do you want to be? What are you willing to do to get sober?
Nice. Appreciate you, Dave. And I will, just like I said, just stay on here. Appreciate it, man. And for everyone listening, we appreciate y'all.
One last thing for the people. If you want me to do one of these again with some specific topics, send a message, send an email. Let me know what you want me to talk about. If you want me to do something that we didn't cover, or you have a question about what I started to share, you want to go into deeper, send it in, and we'll let God speak through the group conscience, and we'll do another podcast and we'll cover it.
Absolutely. And they can
Thanks for letting me share.
Appreciate you, buddy. And they can also share, they can comment on the YouTube link as well. So
absolutely. And one last thing, I don't care who you are or what you've done. I love you, and there's not a damn thing you can do about that.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.